Let's talk about how Shift Grit's protocol works with addictions. So, a couple things about addictions. The type of addiction matters, and how active that addiction is matters. So, if you're going to be high in session, we're not going to work with that. Make sense? But outside of that, let's just talk about how addiction comes to be. So, if we go back to our pattern theory, where we've got non nurturing elements, so early stuff that happens in our childhood that is not so ideal, it doesn't help us form a really safe, adaptive perspective of ourselves or of the world. So, it might be something like a sexual abuse thing, domestic violence thing, and sometimes they're a little bit more nuanced, like favoritism of a sibling, or you move far away from your extended family who you're really close to, etc., etc. All kinds of disruptors. Those things feed into the development of a limiting belief. So whatever the limiting belief is, has a dysfunctional need. Whatever the dysfunctional need is, which is the polar opposite of the limiting belief, it will create a pressure cooker. And that's because the dysfunctional need calls for us to action something. So I need to do things to be perfect, or I need to do things to be in control all the time. It's a really common one we see with addiction. I need to be in control, I need to be in control, I need to be in control. And that pressure cooker gets so big and so intense that we need something that is going to blast off that level of control, right? So it's the total opposite of whatever the dysfunctional need is. So if, as commonly is present in addiction, the limiting belief is I'm not in control, so I need to control everything. Pressure cooker is all of those control behaviors. Sometimes it even includes things like how people perceive us, or, like what my appearance is, all kinds of like control, all over. Gets too much for our brain. And then your walnut brain will make a suggestion like, hey, why don't you just have a glass of wine? Why don't you just smoke a joint? Why don't you just do a line? Insert whatever the addiction is, right? And because it starts that cycle again and again and again, eventually the opt-out of whatever it is that's going to make you actually not in control becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And people get stuck in this not control cycle where the pattern theory goes faster and faster and faster, where it almost eclipses all sort of cognitive thought. That's why when you ask somebody, why did you have that drink, or why did you do that thing, they often blank and can't tell you, because the choice wasn't made by their thinking cognitive mind. It was made by their walnut brain that is trying to get rid of the pain point. So it's all about the feels. Limiting belief, I'm not in control. Dysfunctional need, I need to control everything. Ooh, that pressure cooker, here's an available option that I've used in the past a couple times. I'm just going to use that more and more and more. And that's where we get people stuck in a cycle of addiction. So how we treat that? We want to know what limiting beliefs are active in that person's addiction. It can be different because it depends on what the non-nurturing element was. It depends on like what kind of thing they're dealing with right now, etc. So let's say in this example, we have somebody who had a sexual abuse kind of thing happen in childhood, and that kind of gets into the I need to control everything, because control is related to safety, right? Then they get that cycle happening. I'm not in control. I need to control everything. Control. Cocaine. And more and more and more and more. And of course, if your walnut brain knows a little like quick trick, quick opt-out, it's going to rely on that more and more and more. And the more they do it, the more it relies on it. And because they're using that opt-out to kind of self-regulate, you're also not developing all the adaptive self-regulation tools, so the whole thing's going to get way worse. That's why we see addiction typically as a progressive disease, right? It gets way worse. It starts here and then tumbles down. Now, we don't believe that you have to hit rock bottom. We don't believe in any of that. We do believe that the limiting belief is messing with the person and needs to be eradicated. So that's the first place we go. Identify them, that's session 2 and session 3, and then we'll use our specific protocol to neutralize them. So if the limiting belief's not there, we don't have the dysfunctional need, we don't have the pressure cooker, we don't have a need for the opt-out, it's all controlled for, and the whole cycle is gone, allowing people to make the cognitive choice. So just because you've got the habit of doing X or Y or Z, you can now cognitively override it to be, that isn't a great thing for me. It has these consequences. Consequences live in the cognitive, not in the walnut brain, and it allows you to pick differently. And that picking differently and being empowered to do so with the right part of your brain is how we treat that. To wrangle your walnut brain, click Start Therapy below.